Well, thank you so much. We'll be able to fit it all in, I really promise. That's why I wanted to stop the conversation and get to our next panel, which is called From Startup to Scale. So I'd like to hand it over to Ryan Armbruster, and if you would introduce yourself and the rest of your panel.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Armbruster. I am a senior fellow here at the University of Minnesota, and more specifically, director of our Master's in Healthcare Administration Executive Program, located in our School of Public Health. Along those lines, I wanted to make a comment here this morning about the proceedings so far. First, it's actually an appreciation about some of the references we've already seen this morning, some explicit, some tacit, about the connections between our industry and public health. It's been wonderful. Although our program is squarely focused on educating and training our future healthcare industry leaders and giving them the skills and knowledge they need to be successful. In a School of Public Health, we also bring in themes of collaborative relationships, human need, population health, and other things like that. And we've seen those all brought to the table here this morning. So it's just a great event to be a part of. And also, maybe if Pinar is still here, maybe this is our collaborative theme for next year's conference. Right? I think that would be fantastic. It's my pleasure to be moderating the panel this morning on Startup to Scale and be part of this diverse panel of amazing experts in the field. To give you some perspectives on where they're coming from, we're going to start with some brief introductions. So, Julie, I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds great. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Not sure if I'm mic'd up correctly despite the tutorial that we just got. So, so I am Julie Pritchard-Hedke. I am the president of Avio MedTech Consulting, and that has been a recent position for me. I started about 60 days ago. Prior to that, I was at Siemens Healthineers for about 4 years in their robotics division. And prior to that, I was in legal for about 27 years. So I have a really unique perspective on what I'm going to talk about today. And so what is Avio MedTech Consulting? This particular organization was started about 4 years ago by an entrepreneur here in Minnesota. And she had the need for finding fractional support to build a quality system for her product. And that moved on to, then she needed to find regulatory support to support her product and the journey of her product. So as she was developing these relationships with fractional partners, she was also finding that she had friends and family that needed the same type of support. Morgan Evans is the founder and owner of Avio MedTech Consulting. She's one of the most amazing people that I have ever met. And from her idea of wanting this fractional support, she was able to build a company called Avio MedTech Consulting. And what Avio actually does is we provide support, fractional support, to medtech startups, some mid-size, but the focus is really on startup innovators and incubators to support the journey of their product life cycle, whether that be for an EQMS system, regulatory support to try to strategize for the FDA, or PDPM help along the way. We've also recently added another offering called Thought Leader to the CEO, which is really just our way to support those CEOs that have come in with this idea or this product ideation, but really doesn't know quite how to get it over the finish line. And so we're there to advise and support that product journey as well. So with that, I'm really excited about today's Convene conference. I've already learned a ton this morning, so thank you to all the presenters already. So that is Avio MedTech. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm Jeremy Pirati. I started my career in health policy, moved to Minnesota for grad school, promised my new bride at the time we would only be here for 2 years. That was 1996. I tell her it's an auto-renewing SaaS contract with no cancellation provisions. Ryan and I went to grad school here. We spent a lot of time in this room in lectures. And since then, I've worked in health IT for Alina as a consultant and for a number of other companies. Currently, General Manager of Solutions for Lusum Health. Lusum is an AI-focused early disease detection company. We use broad health data to predict likelihood of disease, chronic and serious disease among individuals.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Ameza Reitmeyer. I'm the general manager of our brain modulation business at Medtronic, a little company some of you guys might have heard of. Something you may not know, though, is that Medtronic turns 75 on Monday. So we're preparing to celebrate our 75th birthday. And what I would call to your attention is that the entire history of Medtronic has been about collaborating with innovators, whether they be physicians, scientists, engineers, people with crazy ideas, that you know, our job, we're the scale side of the equation, and so our job is to help scale, identify and scale wonderful ideas. For me, I've been with Medtronic for almost 22 years, and I'm a very proud alum of the very first graduating cohort of the Medical Industry Leadership Institute here at the Carlson School, and continue to serve, oh, thank you. Continue to serve as an advisor to that group because it's very much in our interest to cultivate the talent that will continue to perpetuate the thriving medical industry that we have here in Minnesota. So thank you so much for including me.
Great. Wonderful, thank you. As you can see, our panelists represent a really diverse perspective on this topic of startups to scale. We're going to start there and hit that topic, squarely. In 30 seconds or less, each panelist, we'd love to get your perspective on what is the biggest challenge in taking a startup to scale.
Wow, biggest challenge. I don't think there's one. I think to start with, I saw it firsthand. We were a startup. We got acquired by Siemens Healthineers. I would say regulatory strategy, clinical validation. But as far as startups, I think funding is a big challenge for startup organizations. So.
I've only worked in software, not device or pharma. So I would say product, you have to have the product right. It has to solve a burning platform need. Focus, as you grow, you're going to be distracted by lots of opportunities, and some of them are legit, and many of them are shiny objects that you need to learn how to avoid. And then distribution. A few years ago, for months, there was a great Twitter thread around first-time founders focus on products, second-time founders focus on distribution, which is particularly hard in healthcare.
That's actually a perfect segue to what I think is the hardest, because I think it's, for the inventor or the expert, it's easy to make something work once, and our job is to make sure that it works 100,000 times all around the world by people who may or may not be experts in the technology. And so inventors commonly underestimate the complexity of moving to scale. And the second piece is when you are a company the size of Medtronic, the scrutiny on our actions is extraordinary. And so things like documentation, validation, et cetera, which are a secondary concern for an inventor, are a primary concern for us because regulators expect us to have that buttoned up.
All right, thank you for being part of today's panel. Thanks everybody for being here. No, actually, we're going to go one layer deeper, of course. So Julie, let me come back to you. You talked about funding. What does capital acquisition look like in today's market, and what are some challenges and success factors associated with it?
So I think fundraising is at an interesting point right now. I think that during the pandemic, and I know this firsthand because Corinus Robotics was the startup company that I was with, that was acquired by Siemens Healthineers, and I think the pandemic really shook up what was happening with venture capitals. I think a lot of that funding was being preserved for follow-on innovations, if you will, for products that were with the companies that they already had in their portfolio. That being said, though, I think things have really settled down and are settling down for sure in Minnesota. I'm highly encouraged by what we're seeing in terms of some of the new funds that are popping up throughout Minnesota, including what Launch Minnesota is doing. You heard a little bit about that this morning, Tundra and some others. So I'm really excited about the opportunities that are actually presenting themselves for funding.
Tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing related to regulatory challenges. I think we all aware there are regulatory challenges out there. What are some success factors for startups navigating those challenges? And actually, I'm curious on whether there's any benefits that startups see from regulation.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I would say to that is really early market feedback. And we've talked a little bit about it already this morning. Get the patient involved. This is something that I was in awe with when we were doing clinical studies. We kept going to the providers and we were talking to the providers, and I come from a different perspective. I said, why are we not talking to the patients about that robotic procedure that we just had? And it was just something that we weren't really navigating. So I do think getting both the provider and the patient voice is really critically important. And also the voice of all of the users of the product, not just your experts, if you will, which kind of brings me to like design for the masses, right? Design for all of the product users that might be touching it. And by the way, that's not always a physician, clinician. It can be your bedside staff or your nurses. So, ensure that everybody, it's designed for everybody as a team. So I think that's critically important. And the last thing, and we've talked a little bit about it already this morning, but that value-based, there has to be a need for the product. It's going to be really tough to get it through regulatory if there's not a need. The other piece of that is, I saw this firsthand in robotics. We had CE mark for a long time. It took a while to get the FDA approval over here for our cardiology robot. But you really have to focus on what is that need, obviously, but then just to ensure that, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But just to ensure that when you go into the market, there's that need. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself creating market. And there is a big difference between going to market and creating market. And creating market costs a lot more money than going to market.
Can I build on something that you said too? Because one of the regulatory challenges I see is our changing standards for data security.
Yes.
One of our fundamental assumptions is that data is going to transfer. Data is going to be, all of our devices that we're inventing, the technology we've been talking about this morning is enabled by smooth transfer of data from a monitor or a device or a health system medical record to some magic cloud where AI happens. And that all assumes that data can flow seamlessly, real-time, and securely. And the standards for that data transfer have changed and continue to change. For example, one of our recent regulatory submissions, the standard changed during the review period and we had to amend our submission. So this is a huge enabling factor. It's also a potential roadblock.
That's a good point.
Julie, you mentioned the needs-based innovation and focusing on the needs of patients or providers or the people involved in whatever solution you're creating. Jeremy, I know that you're a huge advocate of a needs-based approach for innovation. So from a startup perspective, how are you incorporating that approach, in the craziness of all the things that are going on in a startup organization?
We, a couple of years ago, were at a conference of Mayo Clinic Care Network members, which are affiliates, not owned, but affiliates of Mayo Clinic from around the country. And the discussion was about how could AI enable those organizations to deliver better care. And I remember one chief medical officer of one of the health systems said, I got to tell you, we're not thinking about AI. What we're thinking about is the workforce crisis that we're in. We're considering that coming out of the pandemic, we have patients who have missed 3 years of preventive care. They're coming in sicker than ever, and we don't have the clinical capacity to treat them. That drove our decision-making as a company to double down on early disease detection, to help provider organizations risk stratify so that they were in a position to, from the tens or hundreds of thousands of patients they had on their lists, to use clinical AI in a thoughtful way to focus on the short list of patients who most needed their attention. And the happy result of that is the earlier you catch problems, of course, the less expensive it is to treat them long term, the better the patient outcomes, but it also drove better financial yield for providers, and it continues to drive better financial yield for providers in an environment where their operating margins are at, I wouldn't say historic lows, but they're pretty tight.
So you're in the middle of a startup journey right now, and can you talk about what's on your horizon as your next step from getting, to scale? Like, what's a critical next thing that needs to happen for your organization to take that next step to scalability?
It is absolutely distribution. So
You're a second founder then?
yeah, fourth.
Yeah.
It is absolutely distribution. So we're very proud of the product we've created, and we get very positive feedback from everybody we talk to about it. And so we are now in the middle of figuring out what are the best partnerships that we need, the ones that are going to be most fruitful to monetize that, to get the product. It's not just a technology. It solves an end-to-end problem. How do we get that into the hands of the care delivery organizations that can put it to good use? And so we are partnering with medical device companies. We are partnering with pharma companies. We are partnering with health system networks like Mayo Clinic Platform to use their reach to get in front of decision makers. And one of my colleagues made a really interesting point about a year ago. He said, why is it that the expectation is that nonprofit, generally in the US, nonprofit health systems are the ones who are required to fund technology, information technology, when they are all delivering care that uses drugs and devices? And with all due respect, the life sciences companies have much better margins than, in general, than nonprofit health systems. And so we've taken that question directly to life sciences companies and approached them with opportunities to use our technology, essentially pay to deploy that at their health system customers so that their health system customers can get the benefit of delivering better care, which incidentally also leads to more use of those drugs and devices. So again, we're looking for opportunities where there's a virtuous circle.
And so you've immersed yourself in the world of AI and healthcare from a startup perspective now, but if you put on the shoes of a large organization, what would they need to consider the most in adoption of the AI technologies?
We think about AI as a technology that is not necessarily unlike many other new technologies that have emerged over the past 50 years. It requires governance, it requires decision making. You have to think about it in terms of what are the clinical benefits that it will drive and what are the financial benefits that it will drive. Those are the questions that we get every day. We are asked about, the last panel, somebody mentioned bias in AI training, which is crucially important. And so we get asked and we present the worldwide clinical evidence behind the AI algorithms that are embedded in our solutions. But for any organization, what they're most interested in is, okay, what is the real clinical impact that this product will have? And how do I avoid a fragmented system internally, a fragmented system of AI tools over which I can't govern or monitor or ensure good quality outcomes?
Just by virtue of being from Medtronic, you represent scale on this panel, right? So everybody's thinking scale, right? But by your unique role, you also work all the way across the spectrum, from startups to scale. So can you share some insights, about where the magic is? Like, how do we get startups to scale?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and there's like 3 ways that an idea can come to scale for a large medical device company. And I'll give you examples of these in the AI space for each of them. We can invent it, right? We can leverage our technology, our engineers, our scientists, our understanding, and invent something. We can partner for it, and so we partner with a company with an idea, or we can acquire it. We can take a fully baked idea, we can buy it and bring it into our scalable system. For invention in our cardiac monitoring division, and actually there's a person in the audience who launched this technology and won a Star of Excellence for it with Medtronic. We invented an AI algorithm that sat on top of our loop recorders, which is a cardiac diagnostic device, that reduced the time it took to sort out false positive information by 90%. The biggest problem that it solved was that doctors were wasting tremendous amount of time looking at things at EKGs that they wouldn't have had to look at. And the clinical benefit was both that we identified problems sooner and doctors got to spend more of their time dealing with the issues that really benefited the patient. We did that by taking the proprietary information we had, over 1 million cardiac signals, partnering with doctors to train an algorithm carefully, debiasing it to ensure that the results were not heavily skewed towards a white male population, and then locking down the algorithm and deploying it at scale across the millions of cardiac monitoring patients that we have. I'm in the middle of a project right now where we're partnering with a company that actually has ties to the University of Minnesota, looking at neurosurgical planning and applying AI to better distinguish between targets in the brain that are difficult to see on a 1.5 Tesla, but easy to see on a 7 Tesla. The clinical problem that we're solving is that not everybody has a 7 Tesla scanner, but if you could give a 7 Tesla quality image from a 1.5 Tesla scan, then you can improve targeting accuracy, reduce time for the clinician, and improve outcomes for the patient. So very clear benefit. If it were in an agreement where if we can prove that it works well, we'll buy the company. In the meantime, I'm a board observer and offer advice to them as they go through their clinical trial. And then finally, we purchased a company called Metacrea that had developed an AI-based tool for spinal surgical planning that dramatically reduced the time required to plan the surgeries and improve the accuracy of the outcome. So that was a fully baked, well-vetted idea. We bought it, brought it into our distribution system, and now our 2,000 spine sales representatives sell that at scale. So, there's lots of different ways to make it happen, and we get involved in all of them.
I think that's interesting. You brought up the AI and software piece, and we had a product that there was some confusion on whether it was software as a med device or if it was AI for the robot that we were manufacturing. We used the words autonomous navigation, and that's what our software does. So really understanding, is the delivery a software maneuver or is it AI? And right away when we used autonomous navigation in one of our pre-submissions, the FDA said, oh, that's AI, So I think also educating the FDA, because I think this is going to be a challenge as we move toward more and more AI and software-based med devices, that they need to also be educated on what the difference is between software delivery and AI. So
you've raised an excellent example of another area where standards are changing.
Yeah.
And there's unclear guidance as to what the burden of proof is, both for an initial application and then for follow-on advancements within that application, because the expectation is that the algorithms continue to get better, continue to improve, but if you have to go through a full regulatory cycle for each enhancement, it just grinds innovation to a halt.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess you would all have some perspectives on this, but I'll start with Ameza. You mentioned the partnerships, right, between large organizations and startups. What makes for a good partner in those relationships?
Great question. A couple things. One is patience, because the expectation of a startup is speed and intense focus, that everybody working in that company is focused on one goal typically. Mm-hmm. And you're coming into an organization that's got 1 million priorities and things. So patience and respect for each other, and then realistic expectations about how easy or hard our part of the job may be. Mm-hmm. Because what I have found is that it's like, okay, perfect. We'll sell it to you for a lot of money and then we'll be done. Woohoo! Yep. That is not how it works typically. So I don't know about your experience with this.
Oh,
but,
no. Never happens that way.
No. And maybe you can offer some perspective on this as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other side of the table.
Yeah, the other side of the coin is that from the startup's perspective, smart founders, mature teams will understand that the larger organizations that they're partnering with have different time horizons, mm-hmm. Because they can afford to have different time horizons. And what makes for a good partner is an understanding by the larger organization that the startup's time horizon is measured by them running out of money before their next funding cycle. Yes. Right? So their time horizon is often less than a budgeting cycle for a large organization. And that is part of the thrill of being part of an early stage company, and it's also terrifying. And so you're absolutely right, Amazing. The startup team has to recognize that there are 100 other priorities that the larger partner is juggling, and the larger partner has to understand that if they have an 18-month time horizon for this collaboration, the startup will likely be dissolved by that point. Or there's certainly a realistic chance of that.
Yeah.
I think another perspective is if you're the startup and you're partnering with a larger organization is your passion for your baby or your product might not be the same as the larger company. And it doesn't mean the larger company isn't invested in what you're doing and in what you're creating. It's just what Amazing said, that they have a million different priorities going on in the organization. They know how to prioritize, they know how to stratify. But I think that we have to remember, and we felt this, when we were acquired, I'm like, this is our baby. And we didn't feel like Siemens at the time was really nurturing the product the way we were nurturing the product, ensuring that the physicians, really understood how to use the product. So I like the word patience because we lost patience at some point in time. I mean, CE patients, not TS. But we were losing patience, and so I wish I would have had that perspective, because although we know that Siemens was in it or Medtronic would be in it on a partnering with a smaller company, you do sometimes feel like you're very passionate about your product, but it might seem like they are not as much. But.
Amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about assets and gaps from a large organization perspective? I think assets are somewhat obvious, but there may be some that may not be as obvious. And certainly, what gaps do you have in your success from getting, the startups to scale?
Yeah, I mean, I'll build on what you said. Distribution is our largest asset. Being able to distribute at scale, manufacture at scale, typically global. We have a global footprint, and being able to scale a product globally, that would be our biggest set of assets. The gaps are, and this will sound a little bit counterintuitive, but it's availability of resources, because yes, our P&L profile is very different, but the expectations of our shareholders are also different. And so our first customer is the people that own our stock.
Yes.
And our customers have expectations, and if we do not meet them, we lose our ability to continue to invest in future innovations. And so the availability of as many resources as we would like, and then typically we also have to bridge a gap between things like quality systems or manufacturing plans when we integrate a company, and that is resource intensive. It's also necessary.
Julie, you see this across multiple large organizations. Are there any other assets or gaps that you see there?
Not that I can think of. I think they hit it pretty well.
Amazing. And speaking with you earlier, you referenced the whole process of de-risking ideas or making more confident investments when you go that route. What does that process look like, and have you refined or felt like you've gotten better at that over time?
It's a really good question. Maybe we've gotten better, I don't know. So here's just a little bit about how we think about it. We want assets that we can sell at a nice, healthy profit all around the world. That's the ultimate goal, right? And serve more patients and advance healthcare. There are so many good ideas, and it can be really hard to tell which ones of those ideas can meet that threshold, either because they work clinically and are superior, more importantly, because people are willing to pay for it. One of the challenges, and you both alluded to it earlier, is extracting value from somewhere in the healthcare system for information. Where does it cost less money and therefore they're willing to give us a slice of that? Does it save time and we can somehow capture a slice of that? So how do we actually make money in the different reimbursement schemes around the world, the different healthcare schemes around the world? The US has one ecosystem, but it's very different from what you see in China where it's mostly patients paying, or in Europe where it's mostly governments paying. It's just, we have to think about all of that. And to be honest, now that I've been talking for a couple minutes, I have no idea if I even answered your question. Stop for a minute and we'll let you ask
But it
a
was
different person a
amazing,
question.
amazing.
Oh, okay, thank you.
One of, I'm trying to follow Dr. Giorgio's lead here about asking some tough questions. So I'm actually going off script here. Great job, panelists.
Oh, geez.
But it's not that tough of a question. Now I'm making them nervous.
Let's
Okay.
go.
Let's go.
Where's the trees?
I think that any startup journey to
Paul, we
scale.
need that button right now. The Jimmy John shoot. Sorry.
Yeah, any startup journey to scale involves compromises, right? Or making trade-offs and compromises to navigate it successfully. So you may start off with a vision of, we're going to hold true to this, but at some point that's going to get challenged, likely, and you need to navigate that successfully. So I'm sure you've all experienced those moments. What happens in those moments, and how do you navigate those trade-offs to be the most successful in the outcomes?
I had a co-founder resign over a decision to start using some legacy technology that he thought should be left in the past. And he said, I'm just not interested in working on that. And I said, okay, I respect that, but the reality is this is technology that's going to be used for the next 30 years, and so we can either close our eyes and be blind to that reality, or we can accept it and make some compromises and build a product that solves the holistic need of our customer. That was a decision that was, I'm sure, a tough decision for him, and it was. But the decision that we had to make as a company was we have to stay relevant, and we can hope that the world will change. To the Bill Gates quote, we can hope that within 2 years that technology will completely transform things, but it's not going to change within 2 years. And in healthcare, it's not going to change within 10 either, and it's probably not even going to change within 30. So you better be ready to, right? When I ask my friends who also have started companies that focus on selling technology to providers, and we always ask ourselves, why the heck do we do this, right? Why are we still in healthcare, and why are we trying to sell to provider organizations? Because it's just brutal, especially these days. And the answer is, well, because providers, once they buy and start using a technology, they never stop, right? So once it becomes embedded, it is there for 30, 40 years. So there's a great tail on it. You just have to figure out how you get over those initial 10-mile hurdles, 10 miles high, to get that product distributed in market and becoming a standard.
Can I give you an example of a colossal failure
Yeah.
that I was a part of?
See, I knew we were going to get to some really good things.
If we're going into failures,
I
we're
think my
going to need
friend
more
and Jan- I
time.
think my
I'll
friend
shut
might
the
have been
camera
involved in this too, so we might have to pull him up. So this is actually a failure of scale, and which is why I'm raising it here. So there was a company that had invented a very cool technology that served a known need in the field. Deep brain stimulation electrodes. There were 4-ring electrodes. We wanted to be more precise in our stimulation. We bought a company that could stimulate in 64 different directions. It was amazing. It also cost about $1,000 to make, and we could sell the product for $1,500. The product it was replacing could be made for about $200, just to give you a sense of the scale. The colossal failure was a diligence failure. We took the word of the company, and we assessed it as well, that we could reduce the price to manufacture that product within about 3 years of buying it. 3 years into buying it, we could not figure out how to make that device for less than what we were currently making it for. In fact, cost was going up because labor was going up, materials were going up, and we ended up killing that product. We killed it. We could not figure out how to scale it. So it was a colossal failure of diligence, it was a colossal failure of scale, and I would argue a failure for patients as well, because we decided that we could not offer a product that did not offer an appropriate margin, and we shut it down.
I think there's so much validation to what you've just said, because this is why I'm sitting in this seat today, is because ultimately we did not get FDA approval for our neuro device in robotics. Yeah. And I think one of the stepping stones that led to, I don't know if I would say colossal failure, but very close, but we were what we call more of a device manufacturing company. We were manufacturing a piece of capital, the robot, but the utilization came from a cassette that was attached to the robot. And being acquired by Siemens, they are an imaging company, right? And so the first thing Siemens made a decision to do is take our clinical teams out of the cath labs. We don't need those people. Let's just put in some people who can actually report back on the case. And I said, well, those would be the clinical people. And so what we ended up doing is pulling those clinical specialists, what I would call clinical specialists, out of the cath lab, who were the people who were kind of pushing the utilization of the product. And then all of a sudden we pulled the clinicians or the clinical specialists out of the cath lab. Utilization started dropping. I don't know why they didn't make this correlation together, but that's what was happening, is the utilization was going down even more and even more. And then add to that, you had this shortage of nurses and bedside staff that also was not pushing the utilization for it. So the combination led to, we didn't have the support for our cardiology product anymore. And as we went to go get our neuro indication, Siemens decided it was just going to be too much of a monumental lift to make sure that we had clinical specialists in the cath lab or in the IR labs for the neuro work. And so it is now an innovation business line. It is no longer an actual marketed business line for Siemens. So.
Interesting, super interesting.
Colossal, I guess.
As Dawn indicated earlier, a lot of things don't change very quickly in healthcare. A lot of things stay the same. And Jeremy, you even mentioned that, once providers adopt something, it's usually there for a long, long time. So is anything changing or different today in the space of startups and scale? Is there anything changing rapidly, or are things pretty much the same challenges, the same barriers, the same approaches is necessary for success?
I think the themes are fairly consistent over time. Certainly technology changes, and the ability to scale because of certain technologies is can be dramatically greater. So 10 years ago at a company that I had worked in, we had developed a technology product for providers, and we deliberately made the decision that it would be an on-premise product because it was focused on data exchange, and we thought there's no way that any provider organizations are going to want to have their data running through this utility that's cloud-based. 10 years later, that's completely changed, right? Despite the security standards and requirements and the data security risks out there, witness Change Healthcare, the reality is that my friends who also run healthcare, early stage health IT companies say that their provider customers don't want anything that is going to be deployed on premise now. Mm-hmm. They want things to run in the cloud. Mm-hmm. So that makes scaling and support a heck of a lot easier from a technology standpoint, because you're not managing on-premise solutions that are distributed at 100 or 300 or 3,000 physical locations around the country or around the world.
I have one other thing I would add. I believe patient expectations are changing. Patients expect all of their data to be available to them on their phone the instant it's been produced, and they want as much access to their data as their healthcare providers have. And grappling with that as a med tech company is extremely challenging. If all we had to do is just make it work with Apple, it'd be fine, but we got Apple, Google, Samsung, Huawei, and a million security protocols. So meeting patient expectations is unbelievably challenging.
Julie, from your perspective,
Yeah,
are the things that are
I think patients are just much more active with their healthcare today. I think that they are more sophisticated than they were years ago. I think that if they're not advocating for themselves, they're bringing somebody to help advocate for them. But I definitely think that the accessibility of that information and the exchange of that information is critically important in how we do that. So I agree.
One more question before we invite questions from our audience here. What's one piece of advice that you would give to startups looking to scale today?
Presumably, I could have thought about this question before the panel. I did not. You go first. I'm going to think for a second.
I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I would say make sure you are solving a fairly simple and direct problem. That doesn't mean your solution will be simple, but you have to be solving a problem in a way that is completely understandable to the end user. So I'll give you an example, and I'll, in the process, give a commercial for one of our products.
You got the stage, so why not?
We have a product that focuses on using existing patient data to risk stratify patients who are overdue for colorectal cancer screening, so that the provider organization can put extra effort into reaching out to those patients who are overdue. And by the way, that's about a third of US adults who are overdue for CRC screening and who statistically are at much higher risk of colon cancer or other lower GI disorders. We built this in a way that there is no clinician intervention or interaction with the product needed at all. There is no click for a provider. There's no alert for a provider. There's nothing that changes in the exam room. It is a short list of patients for care coordinators or population health teams to work through that list and call those patients and urge them to come in for a screening colonoscopy, period. On the back end, for every patient for whom we've issued a prediction, we then continue to monitor that patient's journey so that we know whether they were contacted, whether they scheduled their screening, whether they presented for their screening, and what the diagnosis was at screening. And then we can continue to monitor their patient journey afterwards so that there's that real world data, that real world evidence of it. But in its essence, the product is a short list of patients that will drive, by the way, 8 to 10 times the rate of colon cancer detection compared to the general population.
Yeah, I think it's so important to find the right partner, the right strategic partner, somebody who cares about your innovation as much as you do, but that it also either it fits in their core offerings or their core portfolio, or it complements their portfolio. You know, bringing a device into a imaging company was a challenge, and so I really think finding that right partner is going to be critically important.
I think that's exactly right, Julie. And my advice is maybe twofold. One is to stay passionate, because we need passionate inventors coming up with the next great ideas, but don't be stubborn about taking advice from us, because our questions are always with the intention of driving to success. We want your invention to succeed. That's a win-win. And we will ask hard questions to make that possible from our perspective. But stay passionate and keep inventing.
Love that.
Great, thank you. I believe we have a few minutes for questions from the audience. I think we can get you a microphone. 1 second. Yeah.
I can project.
Thank you so much for getting to questions. I really appreciate it. This goes a little bit to the previous panel and also this one. So I am in the business of medical education, and as we're sitting here today talking about partnership and collaboration, I'm not hearing much about that pipeline and how important education is to pretty much everything we're talking about. Not only post-secondary, as we think about the people who are needing to use your devices, because it's not just physicians or clinicians, it's radiology techs, it's everyone. And it's the dental hygiene students who are on a wait list because they can't pay instructors or afford the equipment at the schools. So we're making devices for people to use, but they're either not being trained on them because their schools can't afford them, or the problem goes even deeper in that when we look at especially Minnesota schools, we have low high school graduation rates. We have low literacy and math rates. St. Paul just shared some of their numbers. It's like 30% of their students are literate. These are our future people in healthcare and in business. There's the future innovators, and yet there's such a huge disconnect with all of this. They're the people using your products. And even if they're not going into business or into healthcare, what about medical literacy when they want to interact with their healthcare data, like you were talking about, right? They get those things immediately. What does it mean, right? So I guess my question is, in all of this, in MedTech 3.0 and this idea of partnership and collaboration, what is it that businesses ought to be doing when it comes to education and at not only a childhood level, but then at a patient level?
So I can talk to this because as the former VP of Medical Affairs, one of my functions that I oversaw was medical education on a global level. A lot of challenges that come with that because we're driving education, but at the same time, we're trying to drive that adoption. The education piece is really, when I say partnering with people at the education level, I mean finding the right KOL who is very passionate about what it is that we're doing. I liked to go into universities to sell. I would push our sales guys, not that I could, but I kind of push them, go to the universities because we want to train the fellows, getting to them early and often. And when you go into an academia setting, I always feel like that training gets passed down to different levels. The other thing is I like the fact that you mentioned not just focusing on clinicians, because for us, the utilization happened because the staff in the room wanted to do robotic procedures that day. Not because the physician did. Physician was sitting down the room or maybe in another hospital running a remote control device for the robot. The staff needed to know how to gain femoral access, how to move the cassette, how to move the stents and the guide wires and whatnot. So we would pull the staff, pay for the staff to come down to get trained. We had a center of excellence where we trained just the staff, the rad techs or the nurses or whoever the bedside was. Critically important for them to love the robot more than the physician because all the work was really being done at the bedside. So I appreciate that question.
I love that, Julie. I think that's exactly right. So I have maybe two comments I'll make. One, approximately half of what I would call my marketing budget goes actually to medical education. Fellows, programs, training events. We partner with medical societies to run programs and make sure people get good experience. But I'll back it up. One of our other vested interests as a company that wants to make Minnesota a medtech hub is we invest in programs from elementary school, high school, robotics, getting students interested in STEM, pairing people with mentors who can help them see a future in the healthcare industry. And this is particularly important as one of our diversity and inclusion initiatives, because when a Black teenager sees a Black scientist, it's easier to envision that career path. And so we really try to be thoughtful about partnering with organizations that are nurturing curiosity, nurturing excitement in the people in our community, and then helping them see a clear path to get there. And then obviously, we're sitting here in the auditorium of one of the best training grounds in the world for the medtech industry, which is the Carlson School. So thank you very much.
I think the only thing I would add is that from my perspective, we have to be realistic about what we expect technology to solve when it comes to healthcare. The statistics that Dawn shared at the beginning of her talk are pretty daunting. And I think one of the problems we have in the United States is that we're sort of counting on health IT to solve a lot of those cost and access problems. Some of those can only be solved by public policy changes, including greater public investment and greater university and medical school willingness to expand the ranks of physicians and other clinicians that they're training.
Other questions here?
Yeah, again, I've been part of the investment. Yeah, my question pertains to one of the things that I think Julie raised. Funding is the big issue, and with the funding climate being what it is right now, a lot of the VCs have kind of pulled back on investing in early stage. And it probably goes to Mesa here, that is Medtronic starting to think a little bit more early stage investments, or they are still holding back to the late stage when the concept has been proven? And I think this is going to be a big stumbling block for MedTech 3.0, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we have a ventures portfolio that invests in early stage opportunities, but even that, I mean, I think defining early stage, there's already significant de-risking that's been done by the time it would get to what we would think of as early stage. Like it's not angel, it's not Series A, it's more like Series B, C where we would get in. And then for an actual acquisition, it's almost always when you're either at commercial or just about at commercial. I think, was that your question, Jitesh? Yeah. Okay, got it.
Oh, we're getting booted.
Here comes the shepherd's hook.
Better than the tunnel.
We have one online question too, if that's all right.
Oh, great.
This is a follow-up to the failure story. They're asking, what would you have done differently if you had to do it again?
Yeah.
And how would you deal with knowing what you don't know in these situations?
It's an absolutely excellent question. So the biggest takeaway that I have carried forward from that, this happened about 10 years ago, is the importance of diligence and really being clear-eyed. Like, you get this deal fever. Everybody's in love with the technology. You want it to work. And so it's easy to look past the yeah buts. That's expensive. Yeah, but we can make that better at scale. Or it's not proven yet. Yeah, but we can run a clinical trial. No, like all the yeah buts are what can sink a technology. And so getting a lot clearer about peeling back very candidly the yeah buts. And if the founders are unwilling to look at that, then we've got a problem. And then the second piece is building into our expectations of what happens after we buy the company, appropriate resourcing to integrate operations, quality, and clinical in particular. The distribution side is easy to invest in because that's where the money comes from. It's the stuff that doesn't make money that's actually hard to secure investment for. So I hope that answers the listener's question.
Perfect. Thanks. Let's hear it for our panelists, Startup to Scale.
Oh,
Okay.
well done.
You guys can go ahead and we'll get our next panel up. Really appreciate the panel conversation, the expertise, of course, but maybe what I appreciated most is the honesty. And Ameza, you started it, and then the others chimed in. So that's, there was a New York Times article, I think it was just last week, that said that the way that the brain learns is through mistakes. And so we really need to celebrate those mistakes if we want to continue moving forward. So in the spirit of an honest conversation, and as our two final panelists get settled, I'm going to say that I really appreciate our final two panelists that I'll introduce in just a moment. I know that this is going to be a good panel because they weren't really stressed about what the questions were going to be. They're not scripted. There was a flow, but that was it. And they just said, I think both of you might have said, I sort of need to protect myself from myself because I'll answer too much. I'll say too much. So I really appreciate your flexibility in this, your openness in our prep conversations, and I think it'll be a good conversation that will wrap up a lot of what we've heard today, because you are the closest to the patient. I think that we are coming as we have these conversations today, and you see so much that's affecting millions and millions of individuals. So thank you for being here. The way that we'll start is that I'm going to introduce each of you with about 1 or 2 sentences, and then I'm going to ask you to tell me more about what you do, but as if I was a 5th grader, okay? So that we all really get it, if that's okay. Phil, I'm going to start with you. This is Phil Lindeman. He's the VP of Data and Research at Epic. He's been at Epic for 19 years. And when we were talking earlier, he said that he currently focuses on all things data and research and is currently focused on an Epic application, which is Epic, called Cosmos. So could you tell us what Cosmos is? What do you do with this thing called Cosmos?
Well, I do have a 5th grader, so I hopefully can convince her of what this is. So what we have done, I think, is something that everyone in the world who knows Epic thought we did 20 years ago, which was be able to bring together the community's data for research. So this was something we started in earnest 3 or 4 years ago, that sites could bring their data together, completely de-identified, and then use the entire community's data for research. This is, you've heard this called the learning health system. You know, I think Oracle Cerner has similar concepts, but the idea is that, take University of Minnesota, for example, they're not on one of the coasts. They don't have the Stanford or the MIT sort of data sets that are usually available to them. So being able to have anyone in the country be able to access a massive set of data for healthcare research basically lowered the bar to access to make more people to be able to go in and do research. We don't have a shortage of questions. That's not the problem. It's the shortage of access and having all the data in a place that's accessible and safe and private.
Right. And just to clarify, it's not all of your health systems and hospitals that are on Epic, it's those who have agreed. Is that correct?
That's right. So we're about 60% are live, and I'd expect in the next 2 years at the rate we're going, we'll probably get all but like the last handful that have specific reasons for not joining.
Great, thank you. And our other panelist is Dr. Jagar Patel. He's the Senior Director at Oracle Cerner. And, okay, I'm gonna ask you a question. I don't think I could keep saying Oracle Cerner, so which one would you prefer that I say?
Oracle Health.
Oracle Health, got it, thank you. Senior Director of the Oracle Health Cloud Infrastructure. He joined the company in 2007, the legacy older company, navigated through a number of executive roles, was the chief medical officer across different sectors, and is currently leading the value care team. So Jagar,
Yes.
tell us what the value care team is.
So I didn't do a great job of making sure my bio was accurate. That was my last job, actually.
Oh, okay.
So let's
I did do research and I didn't find anything different. I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault. That's my fault. So the value care team was, so most of my career at Cerner, and then as Oracle acquired Cerner, was working with clients in every aspect of their life cycle from an electronic medical record perspective. So sales, implementation, consulting, ongoing client relationships. That last role, I worked with my for-profit clients in the United States, and I had a small team, and we were focused on proving the value of the electronic medical record and how it helped clinicians, how it helped financial status, how it helped operations. So we did a lot of analytics, data, to do that out of the data sets we had from a patient, from a client perspective. But since then, I actually joined product management. So what I did in that change is I became the first Cerner person to, first Cerner clinician that I know of, to jump ship and join a completely Oracle team. So I was embedded in an Oracle team that none of them were ostensibly in healthcare before, mostly engineers and product managers. So I became the first clinician in the group, and then I became kind of the person that brought all the Cerner legacy knowledge with them as well.
How's that going?
It's a great question.
Hard.
It is hard. And not unlike many big technology companies, Oracle came in with why did you build it that way kind of attitude. And Phil has the same story in his head. Because we both have platforms that are 30 years old, and we've had to evolve them over time. And the engineers would say things like, nobody builds software that way anymore. And we're like, no, I get you, I understand. And so we're learning from a technology perspective as Cerner, but then Oracle's learning healthcare from us. So it's actually been a really good meld of the two things, because both of our companies are pot committed in healthcare. That's all we do. That's all I did. Oracle has a very broad portfolio, so bringing healthcare expertise was really important. So I think it's been a good integration in that way, in that we have superior technologists and superior healthcare knowledge.
Great. Well, a very big thank you for both of you agreeing to be here and on the same panel. You know, you dominate, of course, through your two companies, the electronic health record systems in the country, and it's a privilege to have you both here. So where I'd like to start is, you know, where we are today with AI and EHRs, and then where we're going. And of course, you know, I'm going to put in there some of the unintended consequences. And yeah. Thank you.
Sure,
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Got it.
So let's start with this. I think it was an interview that you had, Phil, that I heard that you said that Epic was building over 60 different AI tools. Jagar, I'm sure that Oracle Health has its own complementary set. I've had the opportunity to hear about what some of those are. But starting with today, what is the most common use case, business case for using AI tools today that's in place today, that's being used in health systems? What's the most common? Phil, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'd say the most common are things that probably have been being used for the better part of 20 years. And they weren't cool to call AI. We called them predictive analytics, or we called it, maybe we got a little risky and we said machine learning. So it was, these things were pretty standard. Will the patient show up for their appointment? Is this patient deteriorating? Is this patient going to be admitted when they come into the ED so a bed planner can start looking for a bed for them? It was solving a really specific business problem, but it was part of a much larger process improvement or quality improvement project. So it was like, yeah, the AI was 3% of the problem. 97% is, do you have a clinician champion? Do you have an IT team to build it? Do you know how to monitor it? And it got really not exciting when you start to talk about this just as process improvement. AI got kind of set to the back. So then ChatGPT came out. And now we're in this new era of generative AI, which is basically these textual responses. You can have almost a conversation with AI. So those 60 projects that you're talking about were all geared towards how are we going to leverage what was essentially a GPT family of models, this generative AI, in healthcare. And just to go back, we had been using GPT 1, 2, 3, and we have researchers that look at this stuff, and it just wasn't that good. And then you saw what happened when OpenAI released that about a year ago. So we said, well, what is the number one problem we're trying to solve? Kind of like what the panelists were talking about. And for us, it was, what can we do to make the administrata of the physician's world easier? And one of the things that is a pain in the butt for them that they receive no money for is all of you who email your doctors on MyChart, which is awesome. Do not ever take that away from me, right? So, but the doctor isn't paid for that. Their staff aren't paid for that. So what could we do with these generative tools to make that easier? So what we started doing a few months after this came out is when you message your doctor, a analysis will be done where it basically pre-writes a draft for your doctor of what your response back is going to be. And it will look at your whole chart, it'll understand the context of what's going on and what you asked for. And then the clinician can look at that draft and say, I don't want it, or they can modify it and then send it on. There's no automation, there's always a human in the loop, the physician's always reviewing these things. Both Massachusetts General and University of California have now published on the use of this. So it's live. I forget the exact number. We're doing something like 1 million messages a month now across about 100 different health systems. So it's really caught on, but the crazy part is it didn't save physicians any time. All it did was essentially remove the writer's block of I'm staring at this blank thing, I need to go all do these things. So the responses are better, they're more empathetic, they're usually longer, but the doctor is still spending about the same amount of time on this process. So it is a very interesting research space right now. But that's probably the best example of what we're doing today.
Jigar, what about you?
Yeah, and so I'll follow Phil's lead on this and go backwards. So the one thing we've been using since I was in training is voice recognition software. That is AI, right? That is hearing a human voice and turning it into digital text. So that very mature thing wasn't very mature when I started. We had to train it with the US Constitution and all this other stuff, but that is one of the core things of AI. Everybody wants to talk about generative AI, but I like to talk about the other types of AI. So we talk about speech, language, vision, then you talk about hybrid AIs, so you talk about digital assistants, you talk about optical character recognition and document understanding. So it was mentioned around the fax machine. We're still the only industry that uses a fax machine. So what do? We can use AI to use optical character recognition, speech and language to extract the text of that and then give physicians time. From a Cerner perspective, we had a product that was it was an AI because it's a vision. It's analyzing a patient in a bed and saying, are they moving? Are they getting up? Are the bed rails up? So that's a form of AI that has been used for a number of years in our product portfolio. And then many of the things Phil mentioned. The thing I'm most actively working on today. And part of the reason I'm in Minnesota, or well, being here. Yes, no, being here with you folks today afforded me the opportunity to visit one of my clients that is actually using the ambient listening solution that we have. And they're Hudson, Wisconsin, so they're 30 minutes right over the river. They have 45 physicians using Oracle Clinical Digital Assistant. So I was a little dismayed Dawn didn't have Oracle in the ambient listening section. But to be fair, our product is still in beta testing. So we're getting down the path of having our own ambient listening solution. And that is, it's the clinicians I talked to yesterday, and I love getting back into the field and talking to people and how they're using it, because otherwise you get the ivory tower thing and you forget what's actually going on. Because I've spent a lot of time in corporate offices over the years, and you just lose the touch of what it means to see a patient again. But they're all very enthusiastic. They've been great partners with us in making this a reality. And so we're very encouraged by that. And then that will extend past to many, many other things from an AI perspective as well.
So I don't mean to start off with a skeptical bang, right? But I am a little surprised, and thank you for your honesty, that neither of you said, oh, we have XYZ implemented and it's adding this amount of efficiency and this amount of value. So I'm giving you an opportunity to brag about that. Is it just not happening yet? And does the media, do we hear about so much of it in the media, but it's not quite a reality yet?
So maybe I start on this one, because you gave some value statements, and so that same group, we did do some analytics, and I was being polite and not taking up all the time, but in our preliminary analytics of their time from a usage of an EMR documentation time, we had 10 providers. We did an analysis a month and a half prior to go live and 4 months after. And we saw, depending on the provider, between 0 and 40% savings in documentation time. So now, the 0% people actually had scribes with them in the rooms also. So they were actually kind of using AI to help generate, but also scribes doing other things as well. Or they had scribes before. So their time from a change didn't change. So that has led to a decrease in overall time spent in the EMR to up to 20%. And ironically, we looked at chart review time, and that actually went down also. No reason why. My solution doesn't do anything that really relates there, but we could hypothesize that they're having more time to interact with the patient and ask the patient the question about what's going on with you, what's in the chart, that sort of thing. So we're starting to have some very preliminary data that's encouraging. There's a lot more to go dig out. The other thing from a value perspective is, I have a physician in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in one of our beta programs, and he said, I had lunch 3 times this week, and I hadn't had that in 6 months. I had another clinician say, I have 1 patient left on Friday. I'm done with my charting for the week. I don't have to spend 3 hours tomorrow morning on Saturday catching up. So you're starting to see that kind of impact of how an ambient listening solution in this particular case can improve lifestyle. The other one from Kentucky is a husband and wife, and they have 5 kids. And so now they have, instead of after they put the kids to bed, they're not going back in the chart and finishing for the day. So those sorts of things can have dramatic impact on clinicians and their well-being.
Well, and with the workforce issues that we have, it's just not sustainable to have that amount of a full workday and then all of that charting time at home. That's what Dawn was referencing earlier. My husband's a gastroenterologist, comes home at 6, eats dinner, exercises, and then charts until 11 in an electronic health record system. I mean, it's just not sustainable. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think probably the most powerful algorithms or AI that we've implemented have been around sepsis and deterioration. Our customers have published on life savings in those areas. Royal Children's in Australia just published that they believe it's saving 25 kids' lives a year with these 2 algorithms. So there are significant benefits where people are alive today because of these things. The real, as like what we've talked about today, is the administrative burden of healthcare, I think is the area that's ripe for automating the prior auth experience with the insurance company and doing some of these things that, frankly, the insurance company is just slowing down paying you in some of these care, and they're going to pay you anyway. They're going to pay for this thing. So can AI expedite some of those things? So those are some of the areas that we're looking at, but certainly there is true documented outcomes in publications.
So you did transition to where I wanted to transition to anyway, which is the clinical application of AI and use in the clinical decision-making process, or at least clinical decision support. And you knew I was going to ask you this. I wanted to talk
Ready
about
for
that
it,
EPIC
yeah.
sepsis model. So for those of you who are not familiar, and correct me for anything I say wrong, but EPIC has developed and is in many of its health systems has a sepsis prediction model, so that, as you know, sepsis is a huge problem in healthcare. And so it was designed to identify hopefully earlier than a physician would identify a patient who was at risk for sepsis. There was a journal article in JAMA that showed that it really didn't do much better than a clinician. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about just how you validate your model. I don't want to pick on that too much because that's not the point here, but could you talk about how you validate these clinical models, how physicians accept them and adopt them? I'd love some conversation around that.
And I think, I mean, I will pick on this a little bit. So like this is the result of not having a PR firm for 40 years at Epic. We let the narrative get set on sepsis. Our sepsis algorithms are the most deployed, the most used in all of healthcare. They are running in hundreds of hospitals. The institution was the University of Michigan that published the single institution paper on retrospective data. The University of Michigan still uses our sepsis algorithm. That should tell you something. So what's important here, and I think both of you are familiar with how medical evidence is ranked, and at the lowest is essentially observational data, at the highest is a randomized clinical trial. And when you're doing something like detecting sepsis, it's really important to know what was happening in real life at that moment, where the physicians and the nurses overworked, almost certainly. What were the other parameters that maybe didn't get captured in a historical database that the research paper was ultimately done on? So can we improve? Absolutely. We continue to improve our sepsis algorithm. We are by no means perfect, but I really think it is unfortunate that there was a one-site retrospective study done by one institution and their own clinicians did not even change their mind in spite of it. So how do we validate our algorithms? That is a fairly extensive process. It starts with an ethical review. Should we even do this? What are the implications of trying to predict this? And then we work with several sites to actually understand how the model would perform locally. A heart hospital in New Jersey is very different than something in Oklahoma. Those populations are very different. The model has to be able to localize. And then once the model's running, you actually have to monitor it. IT screws things up. They change parameters, and all of a sudden the model won't work. And if we don't have alerts and things like that set up for the people monitoring the model, it doesn't work. So it's a problem.
And we similarly did have a sepsis model that had been deployed at hundreds of hospitals, and it's not that dissimilar. The first paper that was published on ours actually did show a benefit. So there is, and again, it depends on the institution, depends on who's looking at, how you're looking at it, those sorts of things. From a validity perspective, there's a whole massive set of things that need to go into, are we finding all the right things, and did we hone in on the right things as a result of that machine learning algorithm? The funny thing about ours was that, they looked at like 2,000 parameters that you could find, and they honed it down to 8 that were really relevant. And those were the only ones that could potentially have an impact on saving lives and other things. Now, from a review perspective, Phil alluded to how do you compare the data, how do you get to the abstract of the other data, what's happening in real time. Actually, this is where AI could be really good. Generative AI in particular can be really good at this because, again, what was mentioned earlier is that a lot of the data is trapped in unstructured text from physicians in particular. So if we don't necessarily look at that, or if they did, and it's a human reviewer, you're not as complete as you could be. from an analysis perspective. So, you know, we have teams, I have more robust teams now that they're experimenting, looking, evaluating, benchmarking, all the things that we're doing from every single model we use, and using other different products and different large language models and saying which one is best for which purpose.
You know, I'd love to hear from both of you, and maybe Gerard, take this one as well.
Yep.
What physicians, clinicians, how they're reacting to the information that's fed to them by AI models?
Positively and negatively, so it goes in both directions. Some is, I don't like the UI you put in front of me to give me that information. You're just making me click extra boxes. You know, I already made that decision and the algorithm is alerting me again. So on the negative side, there are plenty of things, and you'll go to institutions and they're like, I don't believe anything you guys created, so we're gonna do it ourselves because they're smarter. And that happens all the time. On the positive side, I've talked about the ambient listening and how we're getting success there. So it goes in both directions. The one thing I think I've taken away from this merger is that EHRs in general have not always been the best from a usability perspective, from a technology perspective, but then also from we fundamentally believed for a long time more data is better. More data is not always better. It's synthesized data that makes information is better. And with AI and generative AI, we're getting to the point where we can start to do that for clinicians. So I think we're on the cusp of turning over some of those things.
Phil, any comment?
Yeah, I think we don't often appreciate the decision-making challenges that clinicians are facing. So we had this one group there in Florida, and they were evaluating when should we pop up the alert that says the patient might be deteriorating? At 80% risk, at 20% risk? And what they did is they found, okay, we fire at 25%. At 25%, we're gonna pop up an alert to a doctor. At 24%, we're not gonna tell them at all, because that was the decision point. And then they looked at the data after. The patients that had 24% risk versus 25 died at a 4x rate.
Wow.
So that's the question is, how many BS pop-ups are you willing to deal with? Because you can only take so many before suddenly they're just like, I don't know, I don't want any of these things, I don't believe them. So like that's the types of decisions you're asking your doctors to make at an institution level, and that is a very real conversation.
Yeah.
The alert fatigue in general is absolutely real.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have clients that are good at reviewing their rules on a regular basis to say, what can we turn off, what should we tweak to get to better sensitivity and specificity, or not. And, but some are not. And we give them packages of standards to go use, and they become, clinicians become overwhelmed after a while with how unsmart some of those things are.
But I'm wondering if you could react to this. So, so many reasons for all the statistics that you just stated. But if we think about it, the data that you're using in your models are over-indexed on the clinical data that's collected by a clinician in a hospital and a health system, right? It's all the clinician's notes and all of the diagnostics, et cetera. And we all know, and I think accept, that the environment, your recent travel, your behaviors, your buying behavior, all those things
Your social
are
drivers,
not in,
yeah.
well, and I want to get beyond social determinants, yes, that too, but just how you live your life is also important. And if that's not incorporated into the data stream, maybe the question is, do you ever see that being incorporated into the data stream? Let's just go to something extreme, your buying behavior, your credit card buying behavior. Do you ever see that in the future as being important and being incorporated?
In a clinical prediction, you're saying?
Yes.
I think that would start with that ethical review that we do right away.
Yeah. Now, the one thing most people don't realize about Oracle in general, you check into a hotel, that's an Oracle system. You swipe your credit card, 80% of the time, that's going through an Oracle system. Your healthcare payer, they're often using an Oracle system. So for the first time in my career, if I bring the right stakeholders that agree ethically that we can connect these things to look at it, for the first time in my career, I can bring all of them as common clients of Oracle to think about that, because I think absolutely we can. Now, we've always had experiments and, you know, Apple Watch data. Even before that, we had specific device data, right? A lot of times, and we had 15 years ago, we had a children's hospital that was feeding glucose monitor results through their patient portal, and the clinicians didn't know what to do with it because it was too frequent. It was too much information, and they didn't know how to discern what was relevant and not, because they also didn't have the context of what were they eating, were they exercising, was it a bad sports day? You don't have any of those other things, so the data set is incomplete to look at. So we've seen many examples of those kinds of things happen over the years. Part of it is we as medical professionals haven't gotten to the analysis on a lot of those things to even know what to do. As a pathologist, I've grown up in a world where genomics is actually a thing now, and what I look at on a slide isn't as relevant because there's all this stuff we just never knew before. So it's all changing all the time. Pharmacogenomics is another example where you can start to say, we're personalized medicine. We're doing all these genomic tests, but we don't know what to do with a lot of them. So there's an overwhelming amount of information, and then how do you collate those things together? Maybe we're at the point where the computing power and the AI we have can help us do that, and that's a different conversation than what I've had in the past.
Yeah, thank you. When I was asking folks what, I have this opportunity to talk to these people on this panel, what should I ask? And the overwhelming common question that came back to me was, how do you assure or help assure that your AI models don't propagate bias and address the needs of underrepresented populations? So I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so first is don't lie to yourself and say you'll remove bias. You're accounting for bias. It exists. The people that are creating the data, we're inherently biased as humans. So that's kind of step one, is just acknowledge there's gonna be bias in your data. What do we do about it, and what are the implications of that? So for example, one, we're testing our algorithms, even if race, because that's usually one of the primary ones we're discussing, if race isn't in the algorithm, so let's say we made an algorithm without race, you still want to run that algorithm against different races and sexes and different other protected variables and see if those algorithms actually are different. So if I run a white versus a black population and it performs better in one or the other, there's some bias there. We need to figure out how to either mathematically account for that or choose that that's not an appropriate use of that algorithm. Let's find a better one. Maybe there are other variables out there. So I'd say that's the kind of primary step that we do, is we look at the algorithm independent of the guts of the algorithm by all these different variables. The second thing is some algorithms, some AI, you have to let run in the background and collect new data on your specific group. So I bet if you went to Alina or Hennepin, you would see different patient populations and you would see different patterns in those data where we could actually fine tune the model. So we actually let the model run and collect data for 6 months, and it resets all the variables for that local patient population to be more accurate. So those are two ways that we start to address that.
Healthcare is local, so that bias is very, very important. I agree with Phil 100%. Acknowledge there is going to be bias. You have to always be wary and look for it. Retest, revalidate, understand what's going on with the patient on the other end. That it's going to be there. And then I had this question posed to me from a client in Baltimore, and they said, okay, can I use ambient listening to identify bias in the conversation that the patient is having with the doctor in both directions, right? So that's those are the things that we get the output, we get the transcript and that sort of thing, and that's hard to tell sometimes because there's intonation and other things that you might not gather from just digital words. But it's very important to think of all those things, have an approach, a standard methodology that you're using to reevaluate and continue to hunt these things out, because we both agree they're there. You just have to find them.
Will it be a barrier to have enough data to retrain the models in each local community?
Not with the M&A in health systems.
Did you hear his response? Not with the M&A and health systems.
The data sets are getting larger, larger and larger and
Yes.
larger. There's consolidation going on and those sorts of things, so 100% true. I think both Cosmos and our Learning Health
Exactly,
Network
yeah.
both have a massive data set that does have some indication of geography. We have to de-identify a lot of that because you can't, it's one of the main things you can re-identify with. But, so there's things to do in these much larger data sets and making those available to other people to analyze and look at, and then pull these other variables together as well. So there's, I think at this point, here in the United States, everybody's got probably 75% of humans have an Epic record, about 50 to 55% have a Cerner record, Oracle record. So and it's duplicated. So this is one of the other problems, right? The data is duplicated. And then you talk about the 400 electronic medical records in the ambulatory space that are not our two companies. And so those are also different. So the data there is plenty of data. The one thing someone mentioned earlier around the quality of data, the thing is the data, quality data. I always go in and assume the data is terrible to start. That's the only way you can look at healthcare data. It's bad to start. So you have to think about what's that look like coming out of the box. So that acknowledgement that you're starting with dirty data has to be there. I assume no other way to go think about the data.
Before we transition to audience questions, here's my last question to you, which is that in the spirit of an entire ecosystem driving innovation and then needing to work together, how do you design or how are your systems designed to incorporate the innovation of smaller companies that develop their own models that may be faster, better, cheaper than what you have, maybe completely different than what you have to offer? How does your company work with smaller companies to incorporate those opportunities?
Yeah, I think the advent of Smart on Fire and the ability for small companies to create applications that can be plugged into the monoliths that we represent.
Could you, what is that, Smart on Fire?
So Smart on Fire, so Smart is a container and an approach to developing applications. Fire is an HL7 standard. It's the newest version that allows for the communication and the normalization of data across and sharing of data across systems. Now, it's in evolution and continuing to get better, but it's not totally complete. That is one example where that has opened the arena. Cerner had a store, Epic has a store where those companies can bring those and people can say, yeah, I'd like to use that, and they can plug it in. And we did help to maintain the standard by which it's done, security and other things. The other thing from an Oracle Health perspective that more and more we're talking about everything being an open API. So that's how people develop software today. So that will be our own journey as well in opening up our ecosystem.
Great. Phil?
Yeah, if you go to open.epic.com,
Right.
there's hundreds of APIs or communication mechanisms that you could start building apps on today. I know some of you are already. I would encourage, like we often see startups who have designed a feature. They have designed how to make a bold font in Microsoft Word. That is not a product that you're going to have as durable. So it's like oftentimes you see these groups, like their experience into the healthcare is this one little sliver and they're like, oh, we can fix that. And you're right, that is a problem, but then you have to like open it up a little bit and be like, oh, my problem is just this little one. Yeah. And maybe that's really important, but you have to like evaluate whether that's a problem that can be solved as a product or is it just really a feature that's not that differentiating for the long term. And I think a lot of founders really need to think through that and make sure, just like Jeremy was talking about, have an idea, know how to explain why it's solving that problem, and then move quickly on execution.
Great. Let's transition to your questions. Yes. Oh, Jeff.
So I'm a physician informaticist.
Hold on one second. There you go.
So I'm a physician informaticist, and so I talk to physicians a lot and have been for a long time about this. And I want to go back to, it's a question about voice of the customer, and I'll go back to something that Jeremy Parati said, which is that it's a sticky technology, EHRs, and once they start using it, they never stop. And my experience is that they never stop complaining about it. Also,
But they're using it still.
for 29 years. And I'm curious if you have any systematic survey data about whether this is getting better. And I don't mean in terms beyond whether AI might help, and I'm sort of convinced that it might. It's pretty recent, though. Are younger physicians surveying better? Do you have data like this, first of all? And as young physicians come in and they expect to use these, it's not optional, are things going to get better?
We do have data. There are third parties that are surveying physicians and clinicians on their experience. The irony of that survey data is you can be using Oracle here and Oracle there, and you can have completely opposite scores. And so the change management was talked about earlier, governance, input, all those things can can end up in very different survey results. And training is another one, right? That are really important to make sure that the more you know about it, the better you can use it as well. So there's that too. So there is data out there to support kind of experiences. Do I know if it's getting better or not? I don't know the answer. I think I'm hopeful. Having recently been merged with a larger company, I'm hopeful on the technology side that we can improve it.
Yeah, I think the thing that keeps coming up is, yeah, we're making hundreds of updates to make the EMR more efficient and easier, but you just got more work to do.
Yeah.
So it doesn't actually feel like anything is better. So again, we always have improvements, we have things to do, but at what point are we going to say that's enough work on a human? We'll stop there.
So on a human particularly, but then how do you say to a government or another stakeholder or somebody else that wants that data, that's forcing a clinician to enter that data? So EMRs have become the long arm of a lot of people to get data and push administrata on clinicians at large. So that fundamental, that should shift as well. We'll work on the technology to make it easier so you don't have to necessarily do it, but there's a broader ecosystem of stop asking.
Yes, in the back.
Yeah, so scribing technologies have taken all kinds of different turns. Human in the middle, AI generation, human in the middle. That is a way that's out there. It could be human, then AI looking at it. So there's all kinds of variations on how do you potentially incorporate a human or not incorporate a human into the overall approach to creating a note. I thought you were going down the question of what are we going to do for nurses, because inevitably that's true also. And physicians have had the benefit of voice technologies and nurses less so. So that's something else that's, the use cases and how you go tackle those are completely different as well. From how do I then bring this sort of ambient listening technology to many different types of roles. I think we're just starting, and the market is with physicians right now, so that's going to help drive in that direction. But as a voice of a customer experience, we just kicked off our nursing ambient work yesterday. So we've got 10 organizations that are going to be providing us information to say, this is what it should do for nurses as well. So it's a technology that's continuing to enhance and move in lots of different directions. One of my now stated goals is, have it for every clinician. Anybody who works in a hospital, anybody who works in a clinic should have some voice technology that helps them, because we go home and we all do it. You say, hey Alexa, hey Siri, hey Google, what are we doing, right? And we want to make it hey Oracle everywhere.
Phil? Okay. Wonderful. Next question.
Yeah, question for you. You're both work for companies that make and sell products. A few years ago, I could develop a product, feature engineering medication adherence. Like you said, 8, 10, 12 features in that data. But if I use AI to create that product, I can't protect that intellectual property because you can't copyright or patent anything created by AI. So how are you changing how you're developing products to protect your intellectual property in the age of AI?
So I think fundamentally, the AI, the underlying LLM, is not something that you can patent, copyright, that sort of thing. But I think the approaches to engineering and fine-tuning and ensuring the output that you're getting with the input can probably be patented and protected. So it's not necessarily me changing or affecting the source AI, but how do I manipulate that AI to get to the endpoints that we need is probably something that, I know it's something we're looking at actively.
Great.
Hi, my name's Tiffany. I'm a medical student, and I have a question that's kind of similar to the first question, but I know that as a medical student, EMR is a pretty big part of our curriculum. Like, we're taught it, you have to do a course training before you can even progress in school. So much of how we're taught about writing notes, et cetera, is related to EMR technology, HR technology. So I was super curious if you all have had any of your trials that have been integrated into medical school curriculums or residency training curriculums or other kind of trainings with more early people earlier on the journey to medicine, and if that has had any kind of difference with people's openness to adopting these or, you know, ideas for innovation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think it certainly helps. We'll see people that graduate and then say, well, I want to go someplace that had the system that I learned, which oftentimes is Epic or Oracle. So I know there's just some comfort in knowing a particular system over the other. So that's a good thing. The other thing that we started doing primarily for nursing is we have made a version of Epic that is not for a health system, it's just for learning. And like Marquette University in Milwaukee has that to train their nurses, and that system is something that can get them understanding different scenarios and get curriculum around that. So those are some of the things that we've done to help it get exposure out there.
The, you know, having been a physician, obviously, informaticist, the one thing I don't think we necessarily do a great job of in medical training is teaching informatics, the actual use of data, the actual understanding of acquiring data, of cleaning data, of all those things, and then how do you use that data to improve care, as one example. As a pathologist, we and radiologists were the first to really be using computers all the time. You can't run a lab of any size for 50 years without a computer system. So we were, you know, it was part of my training to learn that. And that's different than most people from a medical perspective, medical school perspective. I do think there is an opportunity to enhance problem-based learning with scenarios created by faculty that are embedded and in an EMR, so you get it as you see it when you get to the ward. So I think there's an opportunity there. We'd tried to do some of that over the years, and we ran into the problem of it's a great idea, but nobody wants to pay for it. Medical schools don't have a lot of money to pay for it either. So there are folks that are obviously interested in doing it, but you know, we did have one organization in Buffalo start to do it and think about EMR as a core construct for how do I present a scenario to a medical student.
I'm going to wrap this up by doing a quick lightning round for each of you, if that's okay. I'd like for your answers to be, you know, 1, 2, 3 words long, if that's okay. And we'll start with you. Like the questions, we'll start with Phil,
Yep.
go to Jura, okay?
Yep.
So this is our final lightning round. Okay. What is the biggest advancement your company has accomplished in the last 1 to 2 years? Phil.
Best care choices.
Jagar.
Ambient listening.
Okay. What is your biggest stay awake issue relative to AI?
Overhyped.
Say that.
Overhyped.
Okay.
Replacing clinical judgment.
Like that. Is there a place where AI at Oracle Health or Epic will never go when it comes to AI?
I wouldn't say that.
No. Okay, answer is no.
I agree.
Different than what you said to me on the phone. Okay.
The 2 words. I'll stick with the 2 words.
Okay. One word or two that describes the culture of Epic and Oracle. Phil.
Relentless.
Relentless.
Technology focused.
Last question. I think you know this one's coming. Jigar and I had our first conversation right after I came back from a safari in Africa, and I decided that my spirit animal was a zebra. Over drinks, you can find out why. But I want to know what your spirit animals are.
Bald eagle.
What is?
Bald eagle.
Bald eagle.
Killer whale.
Awesome. That is a great end to this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it was.
Okay, so as we wrap up, thank you so much. As we wrap up, and in the spirit of AI, I decided to take a little bit of a chance, and with the exception of this panel that I, of course, moderated, I was taking notes and put them into ChatGPT. Like this is what I heard, and I'm asking ChatGPT to summarize the key themes from this conference. So I honestly have not looked at it. I'm going to push, return right this minute, and I'm going to tell you what it says. We'll see. And unless it's too long, I will abbreviate it. So let's do this. Hold on one second. In the meantime, I took 2 minutes to summarize it myself. Okay. It's thinking. Okay, here's what ChatGPT says is the summary of this conference. Number 1. Oh boy, it's still writing. It's still going. Oh, there we go. Okay, all right. AI will have slow adoption, but with optimism. The adoption of AI in healthcare is promising, but will be gradual. Like ATMs revolutionize banking, AI solutions need to be convenient, integrated, and solve real problems. Change management and investment in time and energy are crucial. That's pretty good. AI is a tool, not a strategy. AI is a tool to improve health outcomes and reduce inequity, not a standalone strategy. It requires a focus on innovation as a means to achieve broader goals. Trustworthiness and transparency. Before AI can significantly impact clinical healthcare, tools and models must be trustworthy and transparent, ensuring reliability and open systems are essential. A collaborative ecosystem. Collaboration between public health and clinical health is vital. The healthcare ecosystem extends beyond traditional boundaries to include public health and environmental factors like water quality. Addressing bias and inequity. I'm getting to the fold, so I'm going to put this down. Addressing bias and inequity. Despite improvements in access to care, bias still exists, and we need to accept it, leading to missed opportunities. Identifying and addressing biases is crucial for progress. Challenges in scaling startups. Scaling startups face challenges such as funding, focus, validation, regulatory compliance, and distribution, as well as consistency. Involving all users, including patients, is essential. Regulatory uncertainty and changing requirements are significant roadblocks. Partnerships for scale. Partnering with key companies is vital for scaling up. Patience, realistic expectations, and financial stability are crucial for startups to collaborate effectively with larger organizations. And finally, data accessibility challenge. Patients expect quick access to their data, but technical and regulatory hurdles hinder this. Solutions need to focus on simplicity despite complexity. These themes highlight the opportunities and challenges in leveraging smart AI for transformative healthcare solutions. I don't think I could have done better than that. So I'm going to close with that and hand it to Pinar.
Well, thank you, Arkel. Well, how can I follow ChatGPT now? It's like, no, but it's very interesting. I mean, I tell my students, embrace it. We're going to learn it. It's who am I to say you can't use technology as long as we can do it in a responsible way. So just want to thank all of you here, all the audience, for being part of this conversation. It means a lot to us as educators, as researchers, as part of a big coalition that is moving the mission towards building the vision for smart tech for health, among many other things. After audience, I really want to thank our IT team here who has been just so fantastic. And you know, there's so much that goes beyond the scenes and making sure a very smooth operation works. Thank you so much. And our volunteers, our timekeepers, registration. Becky, again, thank you so much. And of course, our speakers for your time, I mean, and valuable insights and honest, genuine conversations. That's really what we care a lot in this conference. And Arkel, thank you so much. Always fabulous and an amazing moderation. Thank you. And our sponsors, again, our distinction sponsors, our University of Minnesota's Data Science Initiative and Research Computing, as well as our Office of Academic Clinical Affairs, and our community sponsors, Minnesota Council of Health Plans and Medical Alley. Thank you so much for making this possible. Please follow Bach, and I don't know if you noticed we had a little bit of Bach music as you came in today. That was our first time. We were like, we could do this. And yeah, just follow us and come to our events, come to the space. Really, we want to use this space as a safe place for having difficult conversations. Thank you. And now we can get to eat.